The story follows a high school boy who suddenly gets labeled as number 2 after another student with the exact same name, but way more handsome, talented, and popular, transfers into his school. Compared to that guy, he becomes the inferior version in everyone's eyes. But then there's Minamino Chinatsu, a beautiful and extremely popular girl who treats him differently. She tells him he's not number 2 to her, and from that moment, they start getting closer in ways that go beyond just school life. Hanging out after class, playing basketball, cooking together, and sharing personal moments. What begins as an unusual connection slowly turns into a genuine relationship where he, someone used to being second best, is finally seen and accepted as someone's number 1. The teacher announced that the class was still one person short for soccer in the upcoming sports tournament and that it was time to decide members. A classmate turned to Hajime and asked what he was picking. Hajime said he had no preference. The classmate pointed out that it made sense, since Hajime was mediocre at everything anyway. Hajime didn't argue. The classmate wasn't wrong. He stood up and volunteered for soccer. Someone called out his name encouragingly as he put his name down. His name was Satu Hajime. Everyone called him number 2. Girls gathered near the window to watch the soccer practice below, exclaiming over the player on the field. He moved well, effortlessly, and with the kind of ease that drew attention even from people who hadn't been looking. The boy on the field was also named Satu Hajime. He was strikingly good-looking, strong in both academics and athletics, well-liked by students and teachers alike, and by all accounts a genuinely decent person. Hajime, the other one, watched from a distance. That Satu Hajime was his classmate. And Hajime's full name was also Satu Hajime. He noted this without much feeling. A girl called out to Chinatsu, telling her she was really cute and that she and the other Satakuin would make a good match. Chinatsu, Minamino Chinatsu, laughed it off, saying she doubted that. She thanked the girl anyway, her smile easy and unguarded. Hajime watched from nearby. Chinatsu described herself as just average. She was considered the cutest girl in their year by most of their classmates. Hajime thought of himself the same way, just average. The second Satu. This was the story of how the number 2 became someone's number 1. Hajime sat at his desk, eyes low. Across the room, another student stood near the window, unhurried and composed in the way that only people who had never needed to try usually were. The bell rang. Chinatsu appeared at Hajime's side, leaning in close, asking if he was free after school and whether she could come over. The class went still around them. Hajime was aware of every set of eyes in the room. A classmate muttered that doing all of that and then saying she had the wrong Satu would be going too far. Hajime told her she could come. Internally, he noted that this was Chinatsu and that, predictably, he was nervous. Chinatsu pumped her fist quietly, pleased. The classroom erupted in low murmuring. Students exchanged glances, confused, skeptical, some wondering aloud why Minamino was with number 2. A few suggested she must have mistaken him for the other Satu from Class D, but others pointed out he was standing right there. She couldn't have. Chinatsu smiled to herself. This was exactly what they had planned. Walking out of school together, Chinatsu asked if they could stop at the store on the way. Hajime mentioned that meat was on sale Fridays and suggested they take advantage of that. She wanted to know what was for dinner. He reminded himself to talk the way they normally did. Outside the school gates, surrounded by other students who watched with varying degrees of disbelief, Chinatsu said she loved everything he cooked and that she couldn't wait. Hajime told her it was fine. He thought, that went well. Chinatsu showed Hajime her phone as they walked. She had texted him during class. Messages explaining that she had told her friends she wasn't going home with them today, followed by a string of increasingly impatient follow-ups when he didn't respond, ending with a complaint that she felt like the only one who was excited about any of this. Hajime said texting during class was a bit much. She admitted it had just been unbearable to wait. They walked on. Chinatsu said she had been so nervous, but they had finally gone through with it. Hajime agreed. She grinned up at him. Hajime wondered why a girl like that smiled so openly at someone like him. To answer that, the story needed to go back a little. October. Hajime was jogging through the neighborhood when he noticed a figure crouched near the roadside. He slowed. It was Minamino from his class, sitting on the ground, very still. He approached and asked if she was Minamino from class, and whether she was feeling sick. She looked up, startled, wide-eyed, and said his name. Chinatsu asked if he had been jogging. He confirmed it, adding that people without club activities still needed to exercise. She found this strange and said so, pointing out that if he was staying active anyway, he might as well join a club. He said he didn't need a club to exercise. She seemed genuinely baffled. Hajime asked again whether she was feeling unwell. He started to mention he had a part-time job nearby, then stopped himself and let it go. She shook her head and said that wasn't it. She was holding something small against her chest. A cat. A stray, Hajime guessed. It looked thin and weak. Chinatsu explained her problem without being asked. Her mother had a severe cat allergy, so she couldn't bring it home. But now that she had found it, she couldn't leave it either. Hajime looked at the cat. He understood. There was something Hajime's uncle had told him once. To think it through, feel it out, and then act. He had taken that seriously. He told Chinatsu they should take it to a vet first, and that he could look after it at his place afterward. She stared at him. He asked what was wrong with her. She asked twice if he was serious. He told her not to look at him like that. It was doing things to his nerves. He took out his phone and said he would call the vet. The vet could see the cat right away. Hajime moved quickly, going through what the vet could do, retrieving his wallet from his bag, thinking through the logistics. He told Chinatsu to wrap the cat in his towel and asked if she could come along with him to his place first while he grabbed what he needed. She said of course, but she looked uncertain. Chinatsu asked, half stunned, whether Satokuin had always been this kind of person. Hajime asked, with mild alarm, how she had seen him before. She explained, flustered, words tumbling out, that she had assumed he was the type to walk past someone in trouble without a second thought. She said he was being really nice and that she hadn't expected it. Hajime walked ahead, unsettled by the description. He asked how cold she thought he was. She laughed, a little embarrassed, and said it wasn't just that. Chinatsu said he had stopped and called out to a stranger, handed over a towel, and was now arranging a vet visit, and that he apparently thought all of that was just normal. She told him it was precisely because he thought it was normal that he was kind. Hajime didn't respond right away. He noticed she had gone red. He told her she didn't need to get so worked up about it and apologized. Lightly, she laughed it off. Something small settled in him, something he didn't examine too closely. Hajime's house was nearby. Chinatsu noted it looked new. He explained his family had moved during middle school, though his old school had still been reachable by train, so he hadn't transferred. He unlocked the door and told her to wait in the foyer, or to come in if she preferred. He clarified she should stay in the foyer. Internally, he registered that he had actually brought a girl home and felt the weight of that fact. She asked if he should check with his parents about the cat first. He said it was fine. Hajime mentioned that he was home alone at the moment, so there was nothing to worry about. Chinatsu absorbed this. A boy bringing a girl home while his parents were out, and said her impression of him was really changing. She turned it over. A kind and charming guy, or a playboy hiding behind a serious exterior? Hajime said flatly that none of that had been his intention. Hajime headed upstairs to get his wallet, quietly mourning whatever reputation he had just lost. He reminded himself there was no way he was the type of person she had described. Chinatsu called after him that she would wait with the cat. He found his bag in his room, checked for the wallet, and went back toward the stairs. From the top of the staircase, Hajime could see Chinatsu on the foyer floor, cradling the cat and speaking softly to it, asking if it was glad it had found someone to help, telling it to hold on just a little longer. He stayed where he was for a moment. He could see why she was popular. It wasn't just her looks. There was something about her that made the air feel lighter. He reminded himself they were essentially strangers, then went down to join her. He asked if she was ready to go. There was still something off, though. He couldn't name it. Chinatsu asked if Hajime wasn't cold. He reacted before he could stop himself. She had lifted the hem of her skirt slightly while adjusting something underneath. He spun away immediately. She told him to relax, explaining she was wearing shorts beneath. He had no idea what those were and did not have the courage to look. He asked himself what exactly he was being put through. She asked whether he was a gentleman or just a coward. He thought, the former. Hajime pulled himself together. He told himself to get it together and pushed forward. As they walked, Chinatsu pointed out that his house was close to school. He confirmed it. About 2 stations from Toyota, a short walk from Nishihachi. She said she had applied to schools near home and lived further out. She mentioned that if she lived as close as he did, she could sleep longer in the mornings. He asked if she was not a morning person. She clarified that wasn't it. She made her bento and took care of everything before leaving. Girls had a lot to do in the mornings, she explained. He watched a middle school student pass by and said nothing. Walking beside her, Hajime asked whether her boyfriend might have something to say about this. The moment it left his mouth, he caught himself. Just because she didn't have one didn't make the question any less strange to ask. She brightened and said she luckily didn't have one, so it was fine. Then she called him smooth, asking why he wanted to know her relationship status. He said he had been protecting himself. She laughed. He noted inwardly that she was easy to talk to. He told her to wait while he went inside to withdraw money. Chinatsu asked whether he could really cover the cost. He said he had a job. He had looked it up beforehand. The examination fee, medication, for if needed 30,000 yen should be enough. He withdrew it at the ATM. His uncle's words returned to him as he watched the machine. Without money, you couldn't access care. Work hard enough that your options stayed open. Money had no morality, it simply gave you freedom. The withdrawal went through. Hajime stepped back outside, reminding himself not to keep Chinatsu waiting. He turned toward where he had left her, and stopped. She was standing alone on the street, holding the cat against her chest, murmuring quietly that she hadn't been able to do anything on her own. He looked at her for a moment. He understood now what had felt off before. At the veterinary clinic, the vet examined the cat and reported no serious problems. As long as it ate and slept properly, it would be fine. Hajime exhaled. The vet thanked them for helping the kitten. Chinatsu turned to Hajime and insisted on paying half. He told her it wasn't necessary. He had taken responsibility for the cat, so the bill was his. She refused firmly. He pointed out to himself that she had been the one to find it in the first place and that he had simply ended up involved. It wasn't a big deal. He gave in and agreed to split the cost. She thanked him and said he was genuinely kind. He didn't respond to that. Outside the clinic, Chinatsu asked if taking the cat in was causing trouble for his family. Hajime paused, unsure how to put it. He told her it was nothing important. She asked if she had said something wrong. He said no. That discomfort from earlier was still there, sitting somewhere he couldn't quite reach. Hajime asked if he could tell her something. She said sure. He warned her that he might be reading too much into it, and that if he was wrong she could ignore what he said. He told her she tried too hard to get along with people. She went still. He added that everyone liked her well enough. He said she might dismiss it coming from someone she barely knew, but it was what he honestly thought. They walked in silence for a moment. Chinatsu said he was a strange person. He asked if that was so. She said yes, he had seen through her immediately, and it had reminded her of things she hadn't thought about in a while. She described what she had seen in him. Whenever a group was short a person, he stepped in without making anything of it. She said it wasn't that he tried not to stand out. It was that he actively went out of his way not to. Hajime absorbed this. She had seen through him too, without them ever having spoken. She had been watching quietly just as he had been. He pointed out that she had never once called him number 2. He asked if she was afraid of being disliked. She said not exactly. She asked if he had time after this. She said she still wanted to talk. He said he didn't mind. They ended up at Hajime's kitchen. He prepared tea while Chinatsu sat nearby. She remarked that he was good at housework. He said he did it all the time. She asked how he had learned and whether he had siblings. He paused at the word. She suggested he could practice talking with his younger sister. She was cute, it would be easy. He handed her the tea and simply said he had one. She told him he would be able to talk to anyone if he just acted normally. Chinatsu cradled the cup and then leaned forward abruptly, looking directly at him, and asked if he would be her friend. Hajime stared at her. She held his gaze, waiting. Minamino Chinatsu had been pretty since she was young. Anyone who saw her would say so. She had even done modeling work through middle school. And that girl had just asked Hajime to be her friend. Chinatsu asked again if he would be her friend. Hajime considered this. He pointed out, dryly, that they had apparently not been friends even after everything that had happened, including her coming into his house. She protested that she hadn't meant it like that. He asked what she did mean. She clarified. She meant the real kind. Someone she could drop the performance with. Someone she could be at ease around. He said he understood. Hajime thought to himself that she meant someone to turn off people-pleaser mode around. He asked if she had to phrase it that way. She said yes because that was the least awkward way she could think of. She stretched out and declared that she already felt comfortable with him. He looked at her. The cat slept nearby, undisturbed. He said reluctantly that fine, she could be his. He stopped himself. He tried again, getting the phrasing turned around, and ended up asking whether she would please be his friend. He immediately regretted it. She laughed, short and delighted. Then she said she supposed she had no choice. She asked why he was being so condescending all of a sudden. He said nothing. She pointed out loudly that he had just smiled. He denied it. She insisted he had. He admitted it was maybe a little. She started laughing again. He reminded himself that in her original image of him, he was the type who wouldn't react even to news of someone's death. He had accidentally shattered that. She said she wanted to say it too, dramatically. She waited, then said it was just unexpected, that was all. Chinatsu thanked him for being her friend, openly and without any of the softness she usually used with people. Hajime stared at her. He thought steadily that that smile was dangerous. He also thought she was working very hard not to be disliked. He poured a second cup of tea. Chinatsu said the story she mentioned earlier wasn't entirely accurate. It was more complicated. Hajime asked if the story was long. She said kind of, and asked if that was okay. He said he could make dinner while she talked. He usually listened to the radio while cooking anyway. She sat up and demanded to know if her difficult past was just background noise to him. He stood and moved toward the kitchen. She scrambled up after him, suddenly very interested in the prospect of dinner, and told him to start immediately. He noted, people-pleaser mode, gone. Hajime started cooking. Chinatsu settled nearby and began. Some things had happened that could be called bullying, she said, but those weren't the bad parts, so she would skip to what actually mattered. Hajime thought privately that of course there had been jealousy. She was good-looking, likable, and had been a model. She had been confessed to often in middle school, she continued. Her friends kept pushing her to go out with someone. He acknowledged this and kept cooking. Hajime handed her a cloth and told her to wipe the table while she talked. She took it without thinking. Back in middle school, her friends had told her repeatedly that she should just start dating someone, that feelings might come later. They said all the boys were after her and she should hurry up and pick one. Chinatsu had wondered, genuinely, whether dating someone would eventually lead to feeling something for them. She hadn't been sure. She'd said she guessed it was worth a try. One boy had grabbed her hand. She'd flinched back. He'd pressed closer and said it was a girlfriend's duty. She hadn't wanted to. She said no. She apologized and left. Behind her, voices murmured that she had broken up with him already, that she should go find someone else. The cycle repeated. Each time she ended a relationship, people around her moved on quickly, recommending new boys, urging her toward the next one. And each time, she faced a new round of whispers. They said she had a new one every day. They called her names. Something hit the floor. A hand came down hard against a surface. Chinatsu said all of it had genuinely made her angry. Every part of it. She hit the counter lightly with her fist as she said it. Being single meant people gave off a constant pressure to fix that. But when someone confessed, she felt obligated to take it seriously and respond properly. That had eaten into her lunch breaks and after-school time. Hajime watched her. He was certain she had answered every single one of them seriously. Eventually, she had started turning everyone down outright. Then she stopped talking to boys at all. Her best friend came to her one day and confronted her directly. The words came low, from someone standing close. "Stop stealing him from me." Chinatsu hadn't understood. Her friend asked why, when she could have anyone she wanted, she had to take hers too. Chinatsu said she hadn't done that. She didn't know what her friend was referring to. Her friend accused her of stealing her boyfriend, of seducing him into breaking up with her. The accusation kept building. She was told she had already taken so many other girls' boyfriends, and now she was taking this one too. The charge was flirting. Sewing a button onto a boy's uniform, apparently, was evidence enough. Chinatsu tried to explain that she hadn't been flirting, that the boy simply hadn't been able to do it himself, and that she wasn't even good at sewing. Her friend was crying. It didn't matter what was true. To everyone watching, the one in tears was the victim. After the scene with her friend, another boy appeared. He said he had broken up with his girlfriend, for her. She refused him. He demanded to know why she had led him on if she didn't want him. Then he hit the wall beside her. She had refused him. That was the only answer she had. A teacher intervened and pulled him away, telling both of them to learn something from this, that proper relationships mattered, and to stay away from people who were already taken. Chinatsu sat with that for a moment. When she heard those words, something inside her snapped. Hajime said it sounded awful. He also said quietly that as someone male, he felt like he owed her an apology. Chinatsu looked up at him. She said she had been able to tell him all of it because of the way he talked to people. He told her not to say things like that. He said he was sorry he could only listen. Some things could only be understood by the person who had been through them. She said she was glad she had told him. She offered to help with dinner and moved to stand beside him. She explained that she had been at a feeder school and could have continued there automatically, but she had applied to their current school anyway. She had just wanted to stop being where she was. Hajime placed a bowl on the counter. Even so, he thought she had ended up popular again. Chinatsu said he was completely right. Nothing got past him. At the entrance ceremony, her status had been decided within moments. Boys gathered, whispering her name, asking what year she was, wondering if she had a boyfriend. She had thought it would be different at a new school. When Hajime had pointed out she was trying too hard, the tension that had been building in her since that morning had dissolved completely. She told him he was the first person she had ever told any of this to. Hajime stepped back slightly. She had gotten close. He asked if she was feeling better. She said she was, and then looked at the food he had set out and went wide-eyed. She had expected something small. He explained that most of it had been frozen already. The salad was the only thing he had made fresh. They sat down together. Chinatsu said she was impressed, and began eating. Her expression softened as she tasted it. She said it was really good. Hajime watched her for a moment, then looked away. He was glad. Hearing that something he made was good made him happy. It always had. Chinatsu thanked him for the meal on her way out. Hajime told her that if she ever wanted to talk again, he would listen. She turned and looked at him. He added, with some awkwardness, that they were friends. She laughed, surprised. They exchanged numbers. She said she wanted to be able to check in on the cat. Hajime offered to walk her. She said she felt like going alone, and thanked him again for taking in the cat. She walked by herself through the quiet street. It had been a strange day. She let out a slow breath. She hadn't actually gotten everything off her chest. Today had started as one of the worst she could remember. Her mother had told her, without much preamble, that the divorce had been finalized. Her father had left the previous spring and hadn't come home since. Her mother then admitted, finally, that there had been an affair. Chinatsu had had a feeling. She had been right. Then the complaints about money had started. Chinatsu had stopped listening. She didn't want to hear any of it. Not about him, not about alimony, not about child support. Nothing. She had put on her uniform and gone to school. There, she became the version of herself that no one could feel threatened by. Someone harmless. When a boy asked for her number, she deflected with a cheerful excuse. She kept the performance intact. She had wondered, walking home, what love even was. After everything she had been through, All those relationships, her parents, she still didn't know, especially not after what had happened to her parents. She made herself smile and kept walking. At school, she managed herself carefully, making sure nothing about her unsettled anyone. At home, her mother's complaints about money filled whatever silence remained. There was nowhere left where she could just be herself. Then her phone had buzzed. A message from Satu, asking if she was really okay walking alone and offering to at least see her to the station. Hajime's looks weren't the kind that drew attention. But he had told her there was nothing second-rate about her. He had let her be difficult and tired and honest over a warm meal. He had said he didn't hate her. When she had found the cat that day, she had recognized something in it without meaning to. They had both just wanted someone to come. She had always known no one was going to. The memory returned. Hajime jogging past, stopping, looking down at her. He had asked if she was Minamino from class. If something was wrong. If she was feeling sick. She had looked up at him. She thought. It was as if she had been the one being taken in. At the station, she came back to herself and covered her mouth with both hands. She had no idea what she had just done. The cat stirred early. The television was on low. Hajime was asleep on the sofa and didn't wake until his phone rattled against the floor. He reached for it, squinting. Too early. He scrolled through the message thread. Chinatsu had texted him last night asking if he had thought of a name for the cat yet, and again at 6:28 that morning asking the same thing. He remembered. They had agreed the previous night that since he had found it, she should name it, but that they would each think of a backup just in case. They had also agreed at school they would keep things the same between them, no talking, no standing out. She had thanked him for his number and suggested they keep the status quo. He had agreed. Chinatsu had pointed out, with some emphasis, that he was the first person she had given her number to since starting high school. He had stared at her. She said just kidding, but something in the way she said it made it clear she hadn't been. A number only she knew. He found, without fully meaning to, that it made him feel set apart from everything else. He had slept on the sofa because he had been worried about the cat. The cat, currently named Nothing, was doing well. Hajime had sent a photo at 6:45 with a brief update. Chinatsu had replied instantly, declaring it unbearably cute and expressing envy over waking up to something that soft. He put the phone away and stood. Owning a pet was not a small thing. Leaving it alone during school was one thing. But with work too, the hours would add up. Chinatsu messaged at 6:50 asking if it would be a bother for her to come visit the cat again that day. He read it twice. He considered. Then he typed back that he had something to discuss. When she arrived, she was already holding a spare key up between her fingers and asking if their relationship reaching the spare key stage after 2 days was a little fast. He pointed out that they hadn't actually met 2 days ago. He also noted that suggestive phrasing seemed to be a habit of hers. He was glad she wanted to see Shiro, that was what she had named the cat. But there was a practical matter to address. She dropped to the floor the moment she saw the cat and called its name. Hajime had changed out of his school clothes by the time she arrived. He asked what her friends thought about where she was. She said she had told them she was home cat-sitting. He pointed out that she was the type to tell lies built around partial truths. She admitted as much without much guilt. He said that aside from all that, there was something he wanted to ask her. He asked if she was the only one home. She said yes and asked the same of him. He said something like it, parents abroad on business, more or less. He drew out the floor plan on paper. His room was upstairs and off-limits. She was welcome to the living room and bathroom. She could watch television or use the games console. He explained it would help him to have someone check on Shiro while he was at work. She immediately suggested his room being off-limits was because of things hidden under his bed. He said there was nothing under his bed, that she should not enter a functioning high school boys' room as a matter of principle, and that his computer was the actual concern. She held up the spare key, asking if he was sure. He said it was fine. He had seen what kind of person she was with his own eyes. She said the same went for her. He told her he worked at a yakitori izakaya near the park, kitchen staff 6 to 10. She noted that explained the cooking. They both acknowledged, in passing, how little they actually knew about each other. She said she would get the rest out of him next time. He said he had work, so it couldn't be helped. She asked if he was implying something. He said he would never. She told him not to make that face at school. She waved at the door and told him she would see him soon. He stood in the doorway as she left. She called back that she would be back soon. He stayed where he was for a moment after she was gone. He wondered how long it had been since someone had said that to him. 2 weeks after taking Shiro in. October 21st. Hajime and a classmate named Horikita were listed for day duty. After homeroom, the teacher asked if whoever was on duty could do one more thing. Horikita said she had volleyball practice and apologized. The teacher asked if anyone could take her place. No one moved. Hajime thought about his work shift. It didn't start until 6, so timing would be fine. He raised his hand. The teacher thanked him and assigned him to clean the reference room. Chinatsu appeared at his elbow almost immediately, saying she would cover for him, working it so the teacher directed her to help. His classmate Ishizawa leaned in and told Hajime it was his lucky day. Ishizawa asked if Hajime was after Minamino too. Hajime said he was not. Ishizawa laughed and pointed out that her guard was impressively tight, as if that were an obstacle worth respecting. Hajime told him to have a good practice and walked off. They were just in the same arrangement, he thought. That was all. 2 weeks ago, Hajime would have taken the swap without a second thought. Now he found himself wondering what face Ishizawa would make if he knew. That Minamino and Hajime messaged every day and ate dinner together every night. Someone tapped his shoulder. He turned. He said it was nothing. Chinatsu was waiting at the door to the reference room, arms crossed, telling him he was late. He said she could thank her fan club for that. She had already texted him while he was in the hallway, declaring the first natural interaction complete and suggesting they walk over together since no one would find it strange given they were both on duty. He typed back that there had been nothing natural about any of that. She sent back a voice of protest. He thought to himself, when no one raised their hand, he should have simply done it alone, or the teacher should have picked someone. He was still not entirely sure how he had ended up here. Walking down the hall toward the reference room, Hajime was reminded again of how many people knew Chinatsu's name. Classmates called out to her from every direction. She greeted each of them back with the same easy warmth she always used in the hallway. Even knowing it was a performance, Hajime found it convincing. Inside the reference room, the door barely shut behind them before she let it drop entirely. She stretched her arms out and announced that she was finally free. He told her she was stuck there until the cleaning was done. She grinned and asked what it felt like, being alone in a closed room with a girl. He thought about it and said it felt about the same as being alone at home with one. She blinked. Then she said that was of course with an uncertain laugh. He picked up a stack of papers and got to work. She stood there for a moment, visibly deflated, then muttered that she had been expecting more of a reaction. Hajime showed her the shredder and pointed out that there was a second one she could use. They split the work. She noticed a stack of misprinted tests and declared her dissatisfaction formally. He asked what exactly she had expected a reference room to change. She shredded a paper with more force than necessary. She pointed out louder now with real feeling that they were a boy and a girl, alone after school in an out-of-the-way room, and that according to everything she had read, he should be making some kind of move. He told her to hurry up. She spun around, flustered and genuinely irritated. Hajime, working steadily beside her, noticed in the back of his mind that even annoyed, she was still striking. He kept his face level and said nothing. Someone knocked and tried to enter. It was Ishizawa, cheerfully offering to take Hajime's place. Chinatsu pushed him back out with a cleaning tool and told him to leave. She mentioned afterward that Ishizawa had been looking at her often lately. She said she could tell. Hajime said nothing. Then she told him that Ishizawa had pressured him to trade places after Hajime volunteered. He absorbed this. He asked himself whether he had been looking at her in the same way. He hoped not. Chinatsu said she was really glad he hadn't swapped with Ishizawa. She said it plainly, without the usual softness she put on in the hallway. Hajime asked if she would have been that bothered by it. She said obviously, who did he think she had replaced Mizami for? He acknowledged this. He thought to himself that these easy, unhurried conversations they had were genuinely good. Cleaning done, Chinatsu mentioned she was going shopping with her friends and couldn't come over today. She offered the spare key back. He said to keep it and went to retrieve his book from the classroom. It wasn't in his bag. He had left it at his desk. He headed back, then stopped just outside the classroom door. Voices inside. He could make out his name. Horikita Mizami was in the classroom. She apologized to Chinatsu for going in her place. Chinatsu said it was fine. Mizami mentioned that if it had been the other Satu from Class D, she would have gone herself. She added that she had never spoken to Hajime before, so it would have been awkward anyway. Chinatsu said she disliked it when people called Satakuin that. Mizami said she hadn't meant anything bad by it. She assumed he was probably a decent person. Other girls in the classroom took the opportunity to talk about the Class D Satu. Ace of the basketball club, smart, popular. Hajime had heard enough. He had completely missed his chance to grab the book. Ishizawa appeared in the classroom doorway and inserted himself into the conversation, telling Chinatsu it was great that she was kind, but that being nice to someone like number 2 would have him falling for her quickly. He asked if Hajime hadn't been staring at her during cleaning. Chinatsu said his name was Satakuin. She said it without raising her voice. She described him as a gentleman, said they had talked easily, and that he had behaved properly throughout. Ishizawa waved this off, saying all men were the same underneath. He added that even Hajime called himself number 2. Hajime, still at the door, thought. He wouldn't have put it that way exactly. Mizami mentioned that Hajime had actually played basketball seriously in middle school. When the other Sata joined the club, he had quit. Ishizawa found this funny. Chinatsu asked whether Hajime had said that himself. Mizami said no, not directly. Hajime stepped back from the doorway. He had heard enough. Chinatsu's tone shifted. She asked Ishizawa if he had simply decided Hajime's feelings for him in whatever way was most entertaining, then presented it as fact. She laid out the reasoning calmly. Hajime had been serious about basketball in middle school. He had quit when the other Satu arrived. If that were due to pride, she said, the context alone would tell you that he didn't need to say it himself. But there could be other reasons. Had Ishizawa considered that? Ishizawa backed down quickly, said he had club and left. Chinatsu added that she also found it irritating when people talked about someone in front of her that way. The only thing she knew for certain, she said, was that she had enjoyed talking with him. Hajime stood in the hallway outside the door. He left without his book. He thought, you're being an idiot, Minamino. Why hadn't she just let it go? Kept her distance, protected what she had carefully built, and left it alone for someone like him. He had said that to himself. But then he thought, learn to keep your cool around people you don't like. He pushed open the bathroom door. He could not do anything about it. He could not contain the fact that he was happy. On a day off, Hajime arrived at Satu's house for the first time. When he reached the door, Chinatsu was already there to greet him, tipping the brim of her cap with a small smile. Inside, a cat lay asleep on the bed. Chinatsu noted with mild amusement that it probably still remembered how to wake up. She had wanted to play with it, but for now she picked up the game Hajime had recommended and settled in. They sat together on the couch, controllers in hand. Hajime was the same as always, no pressure, no attempt to push anything. Chinatsu found that easy to be around. She told him she was going to try the one he had suggested, and he said it had a good story. But today, as she played, she glanced sideways at him. She wanted something to shift between them. Not by much, just a little. They were still on the couch, controllers in hand, when Chinatsu asked whether they were friends. Hajime said he considered her one without hesitation. She acknowledged that, then pointed out that while he had learned quite a lot about her, she barely knew anything about him. Hajime said that wasn't true. She went silent, her eyes fixed on the screen. Then she turned and stared at him steadily, saying nothing. Hajime noticed and asked what was wrong, adding that she was glaring at him. She said it wasn't fair. He asked what wasn't. She had heard from someone that he used to play basketball. Hajime tensed slightly. The source she was referring to was obvious enough. He told her he hadn't been hiding it. He just wasn't the type to boast about playing in middle school. Chinatsu said she would accept it if it was something he wanted to keep to himself, but she wasn't quite willing to leave it there either. She wanted him to tell her things on his own. She knew she had no right to demand it. She still wanted it anyway. Chinatsu leaned forward and asked if she could ask him about it. Hajime looked at her, then said it was fine by him. She paused. Then she asked why he had quit. Hajime turned toward her. He hadn't quit, he said. She went still. He said it again quietly, he hadn't quit. He explained that his part-time job after school made it impossible to commit to a club. But a senpai at work had introduced him to a group, and they played twice a week, streetball specifically. Chinatsu's face lit up entirely. She said she wanted to see it. The reaction caught Hajime off guard. It hadn't occurred to him that he still played. Not once had she imagined it. She said again, more clearly, that she wanted to watch him play basketball. He looked at the clock on the wall, then asked if she wanted to go right now. She said of course. They arrived at Voltex, a darts and basketball venue. Hajime pushed through the entrance while Chinatsu took in the atmosphere beside him. It felt more adult than she was used to. Across the room, a few of Hajime's regulars were already gathered around a table. When they spotted Hajime, they went still. He was with a girl. The men at the table erupted quietly among themselves at the sight of a high school girl walking in with him. Voltex was a place Hajime genuinely felt at ease. The people there were rough around the edges, but he trusted them. That said, when two of them immediately approached Chinatsu, one asking if she was a model, the other trying to exchange contact information as a token of friendship, Hajime decided they were taking it too far. Hajime stepped in front of Chinatsu and told them plainly to stop hitting on his friend. She was still in high school, and he would report them. The men backed off quickly, insisting it had only been a joke. Chinatsu said she was fine. Hajime guided her forward. They passed through to the basketball court area, where someone called out a welcome. The owners of Voltex, Yuji-san and Misaki-san, greeted them warmly. Hajime introduced Chinatsu and pointed toward a quieter section of the venue, away from the noise. She introduced herself, Minamino Chinatsu, and bowed. She thought about how she had ended up here. She had asked impulsively, and he had actually brought her. The thought made her feel faintly embarrassed. Misaki smiled and suggested they watch the boys play together. She referred to Hajime as Chinatsu's boyfriend. Chinatsu immediately denied it. They didn't have that kind of relationship. Yuji threw an arm around Hajime, grinning and telling him he had found himself a real one. Hajime bore the weight with visible discomfort. Yuji grew quieter for a moment, then said simply that it was good to see Hajime living well. Hajime said yeah. The three of them sat on a bench near the court. While Misaki and Chinatsu talked, another player arrived and recognized Hajime. He remarked that it was an unusual combination. He hadn't known Hajime and Minamino were close. Chinatsu recognized him at once. It was Aizawa Shinji from school. Hajime already knew he was there today. Aizawa Shinji, top of the social hierarchy alongside Chinatsu and Satu from Class D. His grades were exceptional, his family influential, and despite the way he carried himself, he was considered both a model student and a problem all at once. Naturally, he was popular. His girlfriend Kana was with him, and she brightened up when she spotted Hajime. Shinji remarked to the group that it would be quite the scene when word got around. Chinatsu moved to stop him. Hajime stepped in and addressed Shinji by name, telling him to spare them the trouble. They had just dealt with enough of an uproar already. Shinji let it go without much resistance, dropping the subject with mild complaint. Then he glanced toward Chinatsu and said, almost as an aside, that he had always assumed she was just another superficial girl. But she had some taste after all if she had picked Hajime. Chinatsu stood nearby, processing the fact that Hajime had just called him Shinji. She wondered if they were actually friends. Shinji was not a delinquent, he simply dressed like one. He was Hajime's basketball partner and one of the few people who understood his situation. Shinji leaned toward Hajime and told him that since Chinatsu was here watching, he should feel free to show off a little. Hajime replied flatly that Shinji was just going to try and outshine him anyway. Shinji laughed and pointed out that his own girlfriend was watching too. Chinatsu watched the two of them from the side. The game started. Shinji was 182 centimeters and used it. He told Hajime to come back when he had grown a few centimeters. Hajime, at 172 centimeters, muttered that his height wasn't something he could do anything about. Chinatsu watched from the bench, expression blank with surprise. Hajime caught the look on her face from the corner of his eye. He thought quietly that it had already been worth bringing her here. Kana asked if Hajime wasn't impressive when he played. Chinatsu hadn't expected it at all. She had never once gotten the sense he was athletic. On the court, Hajime moved without drawing attention to himself, casually collecting a fumbled ball as another player stumbled. Then he drove forward low and fast, cutting past a defender. Chinatsu watched from the bench, her mouth slightly open. Hajime passed the ball to Shinji mid-run and Shinji called for it. The move connected cleanly, and someone on the sideline reacted with surprise. Hajime planted his feet and kept his eyes on the play. Chinatsu watched it all with wide, unblinking eyes. Shinji went up and finished at the rim. Hajime and another player exchanged a brief, sharp exchange of effort near the hoop. Chinatsu murmured that they were good. Misaki, beside her, agreed warmly. Misaki explained that Hajime had played for years and his fundamentals were solid. Good at reading the floor, patient with the ball, and knew when to give it up. Chinatsu kept her eyes on him the whole time. She had never seen this side of him before. The game broke up for a moment. One of the regulars grumbled loudly that it was outrageous. Two high schoolers showing up with girls to impress. He announced he hated them both. Someone else said Shinji was showing off like a little kid. Shinji fired back that the man was already winded. Hajime grinned. It was a rare, unguarded smile, the kind that didn't appear at school. Chinatsu stared at that expression. She had not seen it before. Misaki glanced at her and remarked, with some amusement, that Chinatsu was completely entranced. Chinatsu did not deny it quickly enough. Misaki asked what Hajime was like at school. Chinatsu said he was nothing like this. At school he was just invisible. Chinatsu explained further. Here, Hajime and Aizawa were friends. At school, they barely acknowledged each other. He moved through the building as though he weren't there. On the court, Hajime pushed into a three-point attempt. Chinatsu followed the motion. She barely recognized him. She thought that if he let this side of himself be seen at school, people would stop talking about him the way they did. But he kept it entirely separate. The ball dropped through. Misaki leaned over and asked, straight-faced, whether Chinatsu was falling for him. Chinatsu pushed back immediately. It wasn't like that. Misaki pointed out that she had seen enough girls in love to know one on sight. Chinatsu pressed her hands to her face and said she was just frustrated. Across the court, Hajime moved into position again. Chinatsu watched him and thought that the real Satu was genuinely remarkable. After the game wound down, the players gathered loosely. Chinatsu thought about what she had observed of Hajime across all the time she had known him. The way he kept his house, the job he worked, the way he seemed cold but wasn't. She thought about how everyone at Voltex regarded him without any of the distance that surrounded him at school. Chinatsu felt the frustration settle into something heavier. It was always him stepping in for her, never the reverse. She had only ever leaned on him since the day they met. She thought about how at school people mocked him, put the number 2 on him like a label, and he never once responded. She thought about the fact that she and Hajime pretended not to know each other there, and how useless that made her feel when anyone started talking. Misaki, watching her, simply said to let them talk. Misaki dismissed the whole social hierarchy as pointless. She had dealt with the same thing herself in school and eventually dropped out. She said Chinatsu had managed to function under those conditions, which she considered remarkable in itself. Kana reacted with surprised amusement when she realized who Chinatsu was. Chinatsu noted quietly that despite Kana's manner, she had still gotten into college. Kana asked what Chinatsu had been saying before. Chinatsu confirmed Hajime was being talked about at school. Chinatsu sat with it. She and Hajime kept their distance from each other at school, and it sat badly with her that she couldn't do anything when people started in on him. Misaki said those people were just noise, What they said had no weight over anyone's actual life or relationships. Misaki added that the Hajime she knew was a good kid. Cool one, even. Chinatsu said it wasn't that simple. It was harder than that for a high schooler to just stop caring what people thought. Misaki acknowledged it. Then she said something else, more quietly. Not everyone needed to be understood by the whole world. For some people, one place where they belonged, one person who actually saw them, was enough. On the court, Hajime moved between Yuji and another player, easy and unguarded. Chinatsu pressed a hand to her chest. She said she understood now. She thought about the moment Hajime had simply sat beside her and understood what she was going through. He hadn't fixed anything. He had just recognized it. And it had been enough to lift something off her entirely. Misaki asked how much Chinatsu actually knew about Hajime's situation. Chinatsu said she knew he lived alone and worked after school, and that today was the first time she had learned he still played basketball. Misaki considered this. She said that until Hajime told Chinatsu himself, she wouldn't say more, other than what Chinatsu had just seen. Misaki told Chinatsu to take good care of him. Chinatsu said she would. She looked out at the court. She didn't know what the situation was, the one Misaki had referenced, but she watched Hajime and held on to the fact that she wanted to find out. Chinatsu adjusted her cap. She had spent so much time lately feeling that things were unfair, feeling frustrated, turning small things over and over. But now, watching him on the court, all she could focus on was how much she wanted to know more about him. She didn't know whether what she was feeling was love. She was afraid of what it might mean, afraid, specifically, of ending up in something that fell apart the way her parents had. But even so, Misaki shifted nearby. Hajime looked up from the court, sweaty and slightly out of breath, and gave a small, crooked smile. She still wanted to know more about Satu. Misaki observed, amused, that if people at school ever saw those two high-fiving on the court like that, there would be no end to it. Chinatsu stood up and walked over with a water bottle, intending to hand it to him after his run. She caught herself midway, registered what she was doing, and froze. That was girlfriend behavior. She abandoned the approach immediately, then immediately regretted it and turned back. Hajime looked up, confused. Late October. It had been about 3 weeks since Hajime took in Shiro. He stepped out onto the balcony without a shirt, pulling on a hoodie. The cat watched from inside, still looking for food despite having already eaten dinner. Hajime told her she'd had enough. He was starting to think it might be fine for Shiro to stay permanently. Then a message from Yuji-san arrived. He had found someone willing to adopt her. They lived in Mitaka but didn't have a way to come to him. The message asked if Hajime could bring her over, and whether he could bring Chinatsu along too. Hajime looked at the message, then at Shiro. He told her quietly. A message sat unanswered. He had started cooking for two without thinking about it lately. He told Shiro that Minamino only visited because of her. He looked at the empty living room. The house was too large and too quiet for one person. He thought about Chinatsu visiting, playing with Shiro, eating what he cooked, laughing with her mouth full. He shook his head hard to clear it. He pulled his shirt back on and told himself to stop. Just run. He stepped into his shoes and went out. Behind him, the front door sat still, no one waiting inside. The message replayed in his mind as he ran. Mitaka. He recognized it immediately. He had grown up there, lived there through middle school. It was not a place he had any desire to return to. A blurred memory of a school uniform, a team photo with younger faces. He kept running. He decided to go anyway. The next morning, Hajime arrived at Toyota Station with Shiro's carrier and supplies in hand. Chinatsu was already there, waving from across the platform. She said good morning and commented that he looked sharp today. He said the same to her, flat and brief. She asked what he was staring at. He started to say something, caught himself mid-word, and redirected. Her clothes looked nice. She raised an eyebrow and asked if he had been about to say she looked pretty. He said nothing. She turned away, smiling. On the train, Chinatsu pointed out that he had always seemed completely indifferent to her, so seeing him caught off guard was satisfying. She added that she had been starting to wonder if he had any interest in girls at all. He ignored this, which prompted her to follow up with a comparison. If he were a seasoning, he would be salt. He told her that when he ignored something, the correct response was not to add more. She laughed and said that most people never noticed it was salt making everything taste good anyway. He almost reacted. He controlled it. She softened and said he understood her too well. Then she admitted that somewhere along the way, she had stopped feeling like they needed to find Shiro a new owner at all. Like nothing needed to change. Hajime said it wasn't just her. She smiled and said she saw he had felt the same way. Shiro stirred in the carrier between them. The train pulled into the area near Mitaka. Hajime looked out the window with a still face, saying nothing. They arrived at the apartment building in Mitaka and rang the bell for Unit 101. A voice from inside welcomed them in. The nameplate read Kadawaki. Chinatsu crouched to adjust her bag. Hajime stepped through the door first. Something was cooking inside. Chinatsu inhaled and her stomach responded immediately. She was embarrassed by the sound. An older woman appeared from the kitchen. Both Hajime and Chinatsu introduced themselves properly, giving their full names and mentioning that Misaki-san had referred them. The woman introduced herself as Kadawaki Kanade. She looked at them warmly, called them well-mannered children, and invited them to stay for beef stew. Chinatsu offered to help. Hajime accepted on behalf of both of them without hesitation. Kanade-san commented under her breath that he was very good at showing appropriate deference. Chinatsu noticed. Kanade-san hummed while she worked. Chinatsu helped bring out dishes. The three of them sat down and ate together. Kanade-san asked if they were a couple. Hajime choked on his food. Chinatsu answered for both of them they were good friends. Hajime recovered and kept his eyes down. He thought that someone like him could only end up friends with someone like her through sheer luck. Being mistaken for her boyfriend was already more than he had any right to expect. Kanade-san scolded him lightly for talking about himself that way. Hajime pointed out, with as much tact as he could manage, that they had only just met. Kanade-san was undeterred. Chinatsu agreed with her immediately, adding that he was especially impressive when he played basketball. Hajime told her to stop. Kanade-san thanked them as they left and told them to come visit Shiro sometime. Chinatsu cried out a farewell to the cat, squeezing her one last time. Hajime leaned in and said goodbye quietly. Shiro meowed from behind the door. They walked back toward Mitaka Station. On the train, Chinatsu said she had had a lot of fun, and that Kanade-san was a good person. Hajime began to say something. He told her that ever since he had taken in Shiro, he had been having the time of his life, and that it hadn't just been today. Chinatsu said she had been really happy too. Then she reached into her bag. She said she thought it was time to return his house key. And as thanks for everything he had done, she had brought him something. She held out a sports towel, wrapped with a ribbon. Hajime asked what it was. She explained. She wasn't sure what a boy would want, had no one to ask, and eventually decided that something he could use for basketball made sense. She told him he probably didn't need it, but asked him to take it anyway. She had gone to a sports shop alone to figure it out. Hajime took the ribbon off carefully. He said her name once, quietly. Then he said thank you. Someone called out from nearby, surprised to recognize him. The person who had called out to him was Kanasaki. Hajime recognized the face immediately and felt nothing good about it. This was not a reunion he had wanted. Kanasaki was as composed and well-presented as ever, acting as though running into Hajime was a pleasant surprise. He mentioned Chinatsu too, making it clear he had noticed her. Kanasaki asked if she was Hajime's girl. Hajime dismissed the idea. Kanasaki turned his attention to Chinatsu with a greeting that carried too much ease in it. Hajime told him internally to stop. Kanasaki introduced himself to Chinatsu as Hajime's friend from middle school. Hajime could not find words for the sheer nerve of that. He had told Kanasaki something private once. Something that had then spread through the school as a rumor. Every instinct Hajime had told him to end this quickly. Chinatsu stood beside him, uncertain. Hajime said she was a friend from school, and that Kanasaki was interrupting something important. Kanasaki responded with amiable indifference, the kind that never acknowledged the other person. Neat, agreeable, and thinking only of himself, that was exactly who Kanasaki was. Kanasaki kept talking, voice light, telling Hajime that his entire family being gone hadn't stopped him from finding a girl. He said he was happy for him. That was the kind of person Kanasaki was. Something dropped in Hajime's chest. Then Kanasaki said it, framing it as an old rumor, something he had heard, that back in middle school Hajime had killed his own sister, that he had put her down like a dog. He finished with the qualifier that it was only what people said. Chinatsu went pale. Hajime felt the bottom fall out. Hajime knew exactly who had started that rumor. Kanasaki had been the only person he ever told about his sister. He wanted to shout at him. The words were there, ready, but they wouldn't come out. His voice had locked. Kanasaki turned back to Chinatsu, commenting on how cute she was and suggesting they all get together sometime with her friends. Hajime stood there, furious at himself for not being able to speak. Chinatsu spoke instead. Her voice was loud and clear. She told Kanasaki that he had no right to smile like that, to wear that expression while using someone's pain as entertainment. The person he was talking about mattered to her. Hajime looked at her. Kanasaki reacted with mild amusement, as though he found the loyalty charming. He stepped back easily without any real concession. Chinatsu told him not to approach them again. Then she grabbed Hajime's hand and pulled him toward the doors. He followed without resistance. They got off at Toyota Station. Chinatsu walked ahead, still holding his hand, and announced that she was not going to apologize for anything she had said. Hajime blinked. She glanced back and told him she had known for a while that he was carrying things he hadn't told her. She listed what she had noticed and held back from asking. Why he lived alone, why he never mentioned his family, why he worked after school, why he kept everyone at a distance. She had wondered about all of it and stayed out of it deliberately. Then she said, voice rising slightly, that maybe Kanasaki really had been his friend, and maybe she had crossed a line, and maybe it was all just a joke she couldn't take. She was still talking when Hajime saw her face clearly. She was overwhelmed, and the expression she had worn on the train, the moment she had chosen to speak, was still there in the way she held herself. He thought, anyone who makes someone he cares about feel that way. She finished the sentence out loud. That person was absolutely not his friend. Her voice broke slightly at the end. Her eyes were wet, though she was clearly trying not to let that show. Hajime watched her. He thought, it was futile. He apologized to her. She told him sharply that she hated hearing him say that. He looked at her, still angry, still a little tearful, and said thank you instead. She wiped her face and said they should go home. He said his place. She said yes and kept walking. He was still holding her hand. He had been fooling himself, thinking he could keep this feeling contained. Back at his house, they sat across from each other at the table. Hajime knew it was time. He wanted to tell her, but the words weren't coming. He thought about Kanasaki, someone who stripped the mask off others while hiding behind his own. That was cowardice. Hajime had no room to criticize him. Chinatsu broke the silence first, saying she had been a daddy's girl growing up. She got up to go to the kitchen, then turned back and sat down properly and began. Her father had been kind, spoiled her often. Her mother had been strict but gentle. She had thought she had a good family. Then she said that this winter the divorce would be finalized. Her father had been having an affair with someone at work. They had even had a child together. She said it was disgusting. She said just thinking about it made her sick. Even so, she said quietly, she still loved her father. He had betrayed her mother and walked away, and she lived with that every day. But the feeling she had for him hadn't gone away, and she didn't know what to do with that. At home, her mother had someone. A friend who came over, sat with her, told her to forget about him and that she deserved better. Her mother thanked Chinatsu for helping, reminded her she had an early shift the next day. Chinatsu said she'd make a bento, and her mother said good night. Alone in her room, Chinatsu pressed her hand to her face. It wasn't only at school. She had a role to hold at home too. She told Hajime that the day she had found Shiro crying, she hadn't wanted to be anywhere. Not home, not school. When he had taken Shiro in, she had latched onto him the same way, like a stray who had nowhere else to go. She had used his home as somewhere to escape to. She held the key in her palm and admitted, honestly, that she hadn't really wanted to give it back. This place was her everything. She couldn't take off the mask she wore anywhere else. But here, in front of him, she could. That was who she was. Minamino Chinatsu. Hajime started to ask why she was telling him all this. She stopped him with a hand up. She wasn't finished. She apologized for putting all of that on him, but said she had wanted him to know. And she wanted to know about him too. Hajime looked at her. Even after everything she had just shared, he hesitated. He was afraid of what she would think of him once she knew. He said it wasn't a pleasant story. She pointed out that hers hadn't been either. She said she wanted to hear it, and that he could take his time. He sat with that for a moment. Then he said, all right. The word he began with was the one his sister used to call him. His sister Miho called out to him from the other room, wanting him to skip the closing ceremony with her. He told her it wasn't that simple. She made her case anyway. It was their father's last day of vacation, and if they skipped, he could drive them to the beach. Their father laughed and clarified that he had just taken time off to help with the move. Miho immediately asked if he would drive them anyway. Hajime looked at her and thought she had always been like this. He pointed out she still hadn't finished unpacking. She accused him of taking everything too seriously. When he told her she wouldn't be going to the closing ceremony, she negotiated. She would unpack, but only if the beach plan stayed intact. He said fine. She immediately started dropping things and hurting herself. He went to get a bandage. She complained loudly that it was going to sting in the water and that she wouldn't be able to swim. Hajime held her foot still and told her the cut was tiny. She declared it enormous and said she hated pain. He said they're done. She kept complaining. He addressed both parents. He didn't care much about the ceremony itself, but he wanted to stop by the basketball club afterward. He would take the train and meet them later. His father handed him train fare without hesitation. His mother asked if he would be okay on his own. He said he wasn't a kid. Miho said the club was the only thing he was any good at anyway. He told her the word only had been unnecessary. She grinned and told him she and their parents would be waiting at the beach. He looked at her. He said he would see them there. During the closing ceremony, a teacher pulled him aside and asked him to stay calm. He said the family had been involved in an accident. Hajime didn't understand what was being said to him. The teacher said to stay calm, that everything was probably fine, and that he should come to the car. They would go to the hospital together. He asked if there were any relatives Hajime could contact. Hajime could not make his mind process what was happening. Dad, Mom, and Miho. He said he didn't have anyone to contact. His parents had eloped, so he had no contact with his mother's family. He had a paternal uncle, but he was always working abroad and wasn't in Hajime's contacts. The teacher tried anyway. They drove in silence. The teachers had followed him all the way inside. Looking back, Hajime understood that they hadn't wanted him to face it alone. A staff member led them down the hall. There were 2 covered forms. His parents. There was no mistake. He asked to be taken to his sister. Miho was in the ICU. He stood outside the glass and looked in. A doctor told him the injuries were severe and that recovery was not possible. He said it plainly, explaining they were obligated to be fully transparent with family. Hajime heard the words but couldn't receive them. He wanted it to stop. He wanted to run. There was nowhere to run to. The doctor said Miho was on a ventilator. Without it, her heart would likely stop within days. They could turn it off now or allow her to pass naturally. Given the circumstances, the decision fell to Hajime. In an instant, the world he knew became a different one. There was no time to understand any of it. Hajime asked if he could hold his sister's hand. That moment, standing there beside her, lasted for what felt like an eternity. Just that morning she had been full of energy, annoying him, looking forward to the beach. July 20th, 2021. 4:18 p.m. That was when he said those words. He sat across from Chinatsu now, holding his cup, and said them plainly. He had asked them to end her suffering. Chinatsu sat very still. She thought that no one should have to go through something like that. But she told herself to keep listening. She had to hear all of it. Hajime said it still didn't feel entirely real sometimes, as though it had happened to someone else and he had only heard about it secondhand. The only reason he was here now, he said, was because of his uncle. Chinatsu asked about him. Hajime said yes. Uncle Kakeru had come rushing in, barely holding himself together, calling out for him and asking about the others. Uncle Kakeru was named Hajime's guardian. He told Hajime the house was his now, that he didn't need to worry about where he would live, and that the life insurance would cover things until he turned 18. He said he was sorry Hajime had been carrying this alone, and that from here on they would face things together. Hajime looked at the insurance certificate and thought he had traded his family's lives for money. Uncle Kakeru told him not to think of it that way. He said to take it one step at a time. Kakeru-san asked what Hajime's favorite meat was. Hajime said chicken. Kakeru-san announced he would make carriage. Over the months that followed, Kakeru-san taught him everything: laundry, cleaning, taxes, managing money. Yuji-san and Misaki-san pushed him to get a job and use what he had. For the next 6 months, his uncle drilled the basics of surviving into him. When Hajime started high school, Kakeru-san returned to his overseas work. But they stayed in touch. Hajime said he was genuinely grateful. Without his uncle, he thought he would have fallen apart entirely. Chinatsu listened without a word. Hajime said there was one more part. He had never told anyone this, not even his uncle. He asked if she would be the first to hear it. She said she would. He thought about Kanasaki. Getting involved with him had been the worst mistake of his life. The end of summer break. Hajime was walking back toward school when Kanasaki spotted him from ahead and called out. They fell into step together, and Kanasaki noted that it had been a while. When Hajime apologized for missing practice, Kanasaki waved it off without hesitation. No one blamed him, he said. Hajime had been through a lot. He asked if Hajime was doing all right. Kanasaki told him not to stress about the club. Everyone had been worried. He offered to listen if Hajime wanted to talk anything through. Hajime turned the word over in his mind. Talk. A brief image surfaced. A figure collapsed on the floor, phone broken beneath their hands, and then faded. Kanasaki gestured toward a nearby cafe and said they'd do better over a meal. His treat. Inside the cafe, Hajime sat across from Kanasaki and told him about his sister, and that he had been the one to take her off life support. He hadn't been able to tell his uncle. Kanasaki had seemed considerate and steady, someone safe to confide in, and so Hajime had told him everything. When Hajime finished, he apologized for unloading something so heavy. Kanasaki said it was fine. He said he could only imagine how hard it must have been. Closing ceremony. Someone had written on the blackboard, "Did Satu Hajime kill his sister?" Whispers moved through the room as Hajime walked in. Classmates noted his arrival in hushed voices, asking each other whether it was true, whether he had killed Miho from second year. Hajime stood at the front of the room, holding his bag. Someone nearby hissed at the others to keep it down, that he could hear them. Beside him, a girl stared at the board. She didn't understand. Kanasaki had been the only one who knew. She asked why Kanasaki would do something like that. Hajime had wondered the same thing, so he went to him directly. Kanasaki, confronted on the stairs, shrugged. He'd been worried about Hajime's situation, he said, so he'd asked around for advice. Word spread and the story got twisted. He was sorry about that. As for the basketball club, he told Hajime plainly that returning after something like this probably wasn't realistic. Then, with an easy smile, he added that he'd do his best at the finals in Hajime's place. No need to worry. Hajime stood at the bottom of the staircase and watched Kanasaki laugh it off and walk away. Classmates and clubmates were considerate when the news spread, but not one of them was willing to push back against what was being said or stand beside him. It was only then that Hajime understood what kind of person Kanasaki actually was. That afternoon, Hajime lay face down on his bed. The sky outside had gone gray. He wasn't angry. He was just tired. Basketball. His father and uncle had treated it as something casual, something to mess around with. To Hajime, It had been something else entirely. He thought about Kanasaki. He wondered whether being outperformed had really been enough for Kanasaki to resent him that much. Thanks to his uncle and a few friends, Hajime was managing to get through high school. The school had taken to calling him number 2, a reference to Class D Satokuen, and he noted, trailing off, that it was at least better than being called a murderer. He let out a short, hollow laugh and said he'd rambled on long enough. That was everything. The person across from him, the girl, held his gaze with a calm, easy expression. A sharp sound cut through the room. The girl had knocked something over as she pushed forward, dropping to her knees in front of Hajime. She grabbed his collar, her face close to his. She called him an idiot. Then again, idiot. He said her name, confused. She held on to him, her voice loud and unsteady. She demanded to know how anyone could call him a killer. She told him he had saved his sister from suffering. She called him an idiot again, then a dumbass, pulling him in. Then she went quiet for a moment, face still pressed close, and asked why he was smiling while remembering something that painful. She was furious at the people who had made him the one who had suffered most wear a smile like that, and at herself for never noticing any of it. She clutched his collar tighter, tears spilling as she said so. Hajime told her quietly that it wasn't worth crying over. He began to thank her for caring about someone like him, but she cut him off before he could finish. She told him to stop saying that. He looked at her, puzzled. She turned her face slightly away, tears still running, and told him that she had to cry on his behalf precisely because he thought that way about himself. She looked at him and described what she saw. The Sata Hajime in front of her was kind and independent, and when he played basketball he smiled like a kid. That Satu, no matter what anyone said, was second to none. She grabbed his collar and pulled him toward her. Their faces collided, noses bumping with a small, blunt impact. Then, in the stillness that followed, their lips met. Hajime's eyes went wide. Neither of them moved. She had her eyes closed, her hand still holding the front of his collar. Hajime stayed where he was. Then she pulled back, and in the quiet that settled between them, a single thought surfaced. That was, she declared, still flushed, that it had been her first kiss. She told him he was wonderful. So wonderful that he was the first person she had ever wanted to kiss. She told him to understand that. Hajime stared at her, completely at a loss. Across the table, the two of them sat facing each other in the afternoon light, her hands still loosely gripping his collar. He had no idea what she was saying, but he knew that he and Minamino had just kissed. She thought he was wonderful. That was what she had said. He tried to call her name to say something, anything, and she shot up from her seat. She apologized, said she had promised to just listen and had gotten overwhelmed instead. She announced she was going home. Her footsteps faded quickly down the hall. The door shut behind her. Hajime sat alone at the table, staring after her. Minamino stood outside the closed door, face red, heart still going. She pressed a hand to her chest, took a breath, and declared to no one in particular that she would come again. Sunday. Chinatsu was in her room, rolling around and groaning into her pillow. The memory kept replaying the day before. She had actually kissed Satu. And then she had bolted, calling out that she would come again as she fled through the door. She thought back to when they had been at Kanade-san's place together. Kanade-san had remarked that Hajime seemed like a modest young man, and Chinatsu had agreed with far too much enthusiasm, listing off his qualities, praising him at length. She caught herself and buried her face in her hands. She had been talking about him like a girl showing off her boyfriend. She hoped he hadn't found it strange. And was she the only one completely falling apart over this? He had looked so genuinely pleased when she gave him the gift. She had been replaying that expression all morning, unable to stop, until the thought of Kanasaki surfaced and knocked everything sideways. She clenched her fist. If it hadn't been for him, none of that would have happened. Satu wouldn't have told her anything about himself, and she would still be waiting for a moment that might never have come. She let out a slow breath. She supposed she couldn't be entirely angry at Kanasaki for that. Chinatsu let out a sound, too loud, forgetting for a moment that anyone could hear. then clapped her hands over her mouth and glanced toward the door. She was home alone. Safe. She had apparently decided, somewhere along the way, that she was going to kiss him someday. She stood and left the room, her thoughts still spinning. She had always thought of Satu's house as quiet and familiar, a place she felt at ease in. The realization settled in now, quietly, that Satu had been alone in that house the whole time. She wanted to go back. She understood that clearly now, how much he mattered to her. And if she was being completely honest with herself, she had liked the kiss too. She pressed her face into her hands and made a small, muffled noise of distress, asking the empty room for help. She wondered, if the two of them became a couple now, if they actually started dating, they could go on dates without having to hide anything. She pictured it. The two of them walking together in their school uniforms, openly. Then the image shifted and she saw the crowd. People staring, whispering, demanding to know why. She knew exactly how it would go. They would be harassed. Chinatsu sat with her knees pulled up to her chest, deflated. She stared at a small figurine on her desk, thinking. Then something shifted in her expression, and she sat up straighter. An idea had arrived. Monday after school. 2 days since the kiss. Hajime sat at his desk as the classroom emptied around him, pretending to look at his phone while stealing glances toward the hallway. Chinatsu passed by without looking his way. He watched the spot where she had been, then looked back down. He hadn't reached out to her at all. The day before, he had searched the internet. Questions about what a kiss meant, whether it was always romantic, how to act afterward. He stared at the search history and felt immediately pathetic. It was, he acknowledged, a new low. He would genuinely rather have been caught looking up something embarrassing. He was still staring at his phone when a message came in. Chinatsu was asking if he wanted to get crepes. He replied instantly. Then he stood up, bag in hand, and walked toward the school exit with his classmates chatting around him, paying him no attention. He hadn't made the first move, but the moment she reached out, he responded without hesitation. He was aware of how that looked. Her next message told him to change out of his uniform and meet her at the convenience store near the Nishihachi ticket gate. Hajime stood outside the store, heart beating a little faster than usual. This wasn't just hanging out anymore. He thought about it plainly. This was a date. Chinatsu hadn't arrived yet. Hajime scanned the area from where he stood. Then something caught him. A faint, familiar scent drifting past on the air. He registered it before he registered why. He stood on the quiet street and turned it over in his mind. Was she really not here yet? He looked around again. A girl nearby was checking her phone, head tilted down. He stopped himself, recognizing Chinatsu by her scent. What did that make him? He grabbed his own head with both hands and stood there, mortified. He couldn't stop thinking about her. Kanasaki, whoever that was. Chinatsu's face kept surfacing instead, and he couldn't clear it. He took a breath and let it out slowly. He called her name. The girl nearby turned, and there was a small, pleased sound from her, the quiet kind that meant she had been waiting for him to figure it out. She announced brightly that he had done well. Hajime stared at her, expression flat. He asked if she was serious. She struck a proud pose and declared it her masterwork of disguise. The result, she said, of extensive trial and error. She added, slightly less confidently, that she supposed he had seen through it right away. Hajime kept his expression steady and decided to take the fact that he had identified her by scent to his grave. His pulse spiked at the thought. Chinatsu waved a hand and said they should go get those crepes. She took his hand. He registered the contact immediately. She was walking beside him, calm and easy, the same as she always was, as if nothing between them had changed at all. He wondered whether she was simply good at hiding it, or whether he was genuinely the only one feeling off balance. She turned to him and asked how he had known it was her. She said she had been certain her disguise would fool him. She turned toward him with bright, expectant eyes. Tell me, and Hajime felt his face go warm. In his mind, the answer he was not going to give was already being buried. He muttered something vague in response. She tilted her head, waiting. He said, flatly, that he had caught her scent. He was aware it sounded strange. She laughed. A real, uncomplicated laugh. Then she narrowed her eyes and asked if he was serious. He hadn't actually recognized her by sight, only called her name because he thought he smelled her, so she just needed to change her appearance and her perfume, and she could fool him completely. Hajime stood next to her, looking ahead, already regretting the entire conversation. She changed the subject. She mentioned something she had read, that people who find each other's scent appealing are supposedly genetically compatible. She looked up at him as she said it, calm and curious, a small smile on her face. Hajime's chest tightened. She stepped up beside him, pushing lightly onto her toes to lean against his shoulder from behind. He went still at the contact. She closed her eyes and breathed in slow, deliberate. A pause. Then she lifted her head and asked, matter-of-factly, whether he smelled like anything in particular. Nothing at all, apparently. She tilted her glasses down and wondered aloud what it meant when someone had no scent. Odorless. She mused to herself, frowning slightly. Hajime stood beside her, looking straight ahead, and thought that maybe they were already dating and he was just the last one to know. Chinatsu asked, casually, whether Satu had ever been in a relationship. The question hit him like a bucket of cold water. He had not even close, but she had. He knew that much. He walked beside her, and the knowledge sat somewhere uncomfortable in his chest, even if he couldn't name why. She hummed to herself, a small smile on her face. Though, she added, nothing about those had amounted to much. That had been her first kiss. Hajime walked in silence, the words still floating somewhere in his head. His face had gone soft without him realizing it. Chinatsu announced they had arrived and pulled him toward the crepe shop. She lit up in front of the menu board, good and cheap, she declared. Hajime stood beside her, quietly drowning in self-recrimination over the scent incident. They pressed forward to look at the options together. She deliberated between salty and sweet. Hajime stared at a menu item loaded with whipped cream and decided it was excessive. He kept that to himself so the cashier wouldn't have to hear it. Chinatsu made the decision for both of them. Hajime would get something salty, she would get strawberry whipped cream, and they would share. Hajime agreed. Then, holding both crepes a few minutes later, he thought to ask how exactly one shares a crepe. The answer arrived on its own when he saw another couple nearby doing exactly that. Of course. He wondered if he was making too much of this. Then he decided he wasn't. No one with zero experience could be expected to stay composed under these conditions. Chinatsu, beside him, looked completely unbothered. She had seen the same couples. She was the one who suggested sharing. And yet she turned to him with easy eyes and announced they should eat at her house. Her house. Hajime processed that for a moment too long. It was 3 minutes away, she said, already walking. He followed, feeling like something that had been picked up by a current with no say in the matter. She led him through the door. Her words from earlier drifted back to him. People who find each other's scent appealing are supposedly genetically compatible. He stepped inside. Chinatsu disappeared to make coffee, and Hajime knelt on the floor of her room, very still. It was his first time in a girl's room. He was not handling it gracefully. When she came back and saw his expression, she laughed. He told her to leave him alone. She set down his coffee, black because she remembered, and said he was really something, trailing off in a way that made it worse. She had gotten his coffee order right. He thanked her and took a bite of his crepe. It was better than expected, significantly better. Chinatsu agreed that they must be doing something unusual with the batter. She pushed her crepe toward him and told him to try hers. He was skeptical about the cream but took a piece anyway. It was good. She told him she knew he'd like it. He offered her some of his in return. She took a bite, declared that salty and sweet together was unbeatable, and kept eating. For a moment, distracted by how good it was, Hajime forgot to feel awkward. Then the food was gone and the plates sat between them, and he noticed how close they were sitting. Chinatsu called his name quietly. She was looking at him without her usual deflecting energy. Just watching, close, her expression open. Hajime's pulse picked up. They sat facing each other. He started to say something and got as far as 2 syllables before the moment was interrupted by a crash from somewhere else in the apartment. Both of them flinched back. Chinatsu called out. Her mother wasn't usually home this early. She got up quickly and opened the door. Her mother had collapsed in the hallway. Chinatsu dropped beside her, alarmed. Hajime moved without thinking. He reached out and felt the heat radiating off her immediately. Her mother had a fever.